Our story begins with a young lady named Margaret Oliver. You ought to meet Margaret Oliver because she's working for you. As a matter of fact, she's working for 4 out of every 5 Americans. You see, Margaret Oliver is your representative at the Social Security Administration. Her job is to tell you what your rights are and to make sure that you understand what Social Security means to you, and to see to it that you receive the money you're entitled to promptly when it's due, just as she's helping these people and scores like them every day. The story of Margaret Oliver's work and your Social Security goes back a long way, when this was a portrait of the future for millions of Americans. When they reached old age, they found themselves lacking the means to meet even their barest needs, and so they were forced to become wards of public charity. Denied the dignity of a happy, earned security, their declining years became a period of hopeless waiting. Alone, these people could not work out the picture of a happy old age. Something had to be done. Something was done. In 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt put his signature on the Social Security Act.
This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health.
Then, 15 years later, Congress passed a new Social Security law, a law designed to meet today's needs. Signed by President Truman in 1950, this act gives Social Security a new meaning for you. And so today, this is the portrait of the future, a picture which Social Security helped make possible. Under the Social Security Act, most American families are now able to insure for themselves an income that is guaranteed for life. It's an income provided not by charity or relief, but by federal old age and survivors insurance. Insurance that is bought and paid for. Here's how it works. Old age and survivors insurance is earned by most of us because most jobs are now covered by the Social Security Act. After working about a year and a half, you become insured for the next year and a half. From then on, you're insured for an additional year for each 6 months that you work. At the end of 10 years of work, you are insured for the rest of your life. A special provision in the law makes it easier for people already past middle age to become insured. The amount of work they need depends on how soon they'll reach 65. And if you're nearing 65, or if you've already passed that age, you may need as little as a year and a half of work performed at any time since 1936 to become insured for life. Contributions based on your earnings made regularly by you and millions of your fellow workers, plus equal contributions made by your employers, pay for the program. These contributions are collected by the federal government. The government then holds them in trust for payment of benefits to you and your family.
Social Security has nothing to do with the deficit. Social Security is totally funded by the payroll tax levied on employer and employee. If you reduce the outgo of Social Security, that money would not go into the general fund to reduce a deficit. It would go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So Social Security has nothing to do with balancing a budget or erasing or lowering the deficit.
Self. Now you may ask, how can the government owe itself money? Easy. It is borrowed from various trust funds, including Social Security. to the tune of about $5 trillion. Please, America, do not suppose that the money that you have given to Social Security is sitting in a bank account earning interest in your name. There was a time when that was the case, but no longer. The so-called trustees of the fund permitted the federal government to raid it without paying interest and without paying it back. If your lawyer or your financial manager did that with your money, they'd go to jail. So why do we let the same government that would prosecute anyone who gave away the money he was holding in trust for you do the same with your Social Security funds?
When you look on your paycheck, you'll see that little section called FICA. Those are payroll tax deductions that go into the Social Security Trust Fund. So what happens is that the federal government takes all revenue coming in from the FICA tax system and borrows it to run the federal government and puts IOUs, Treasury notes in place.
Social Security didn't create the deficit, but America's seniors are being presented with a fake Social Security crisis to try to trick them into accepting reduced benefits. If seniors accept cuts in Social Security benefits today, a surplus cash flow will build in a Social Security Trust Fund. According to CRS, quote, Social Security's cash surpluses are borrowed by the U.S. Treasury and can be used for tax cuts, spending, or repaying debt. So here's what's going on. Social Security benefit cuts or increase in taxes paid to Social Security or extending the retirement age will give government more money for tax cuts, spending, or repaying the debt, except for one thing. Social Security money belongs to those who have paid the fund. It's not the government's money to use it. It shouldn't be the government's money to play with. Senior citizens should not have to accept a reduced standard of living to finance tax cuts for the rich. We must take a stand for senior citizens and protect Social Security and protect future generations from this raid on Social Security's funds.
For quite a few years around here, I was one of the members who advocated that we should not be including the excess taxes charged to Social Security or to people for Social Security, FICA taxes, as part of the so-called surplus, spending it and replacing it with IOUs. And in fact, I found considerable support over the last few years on the Republican side of the aisle on this issue, which I found encouraging. In fact, the House Republicans have voted nearly unanimously seven times since 1999 to protect both the Social Security and Medicare surpluses by creating a lockbox. We put it in a lockbox, not once, not twice, 7 times, 7 padlocks, many different combinations. Social Security and Medicare trust fund surpluses are safe. They would be reserved to pay the benefits in the future. In fact, as recently as July 11th, House Majority Leader Richard Armey said, we must understand that it is inviolate. You might have trouble following this, but I'll get to the point. To intrude against either Social Security or Medicare, and if that means foregoing or, as it were, paying for tax cuts, then we'll do that. He said he wasn't going to spend the money. And, in fact, that they might forego tax cuts in order to not break into the lockbox. Good news! Well, that was July 11th. It's now September. How much things have changed. The new Congressional Budget Office estimates, the Congressional Budget Office is headed by a Republican appointee, says that the surplus for the next 9 years is $2.2 trillion. Trillion, not billion, not million, trillion dollars less than projected last May. Remember the rosy scenario? Oh, pass the tax cuts today and don't worry about it. There'll be so much money be floating in money. We can still maintain the integrity of the lockbox, Social Security, Medicare, and we can increase military spending, and we can do all these things, and there'll still be surplus. In fact, the gentleman who preceded me in the well talked about the surplus. The surplus he talked about is the Social Security Trust Fund. It is raised through an unfair, flat, regressive tax capped at $80,000 a year income. So the rich people aren't putting in a penny over the little bit they pay on their first $80,000 of income. Most working families are paying more in Social Security taxes than they are in income taxes to the federal government. In fact, many working Americans aren't getting back a rebate because of that fact. But they don't mind too much because they know their money's going in the lockbox created. Now, What's in the lockbox? Oops. Well, not much money. There is something in here, though. Ha! Good. I owe you $9 billion. Signed, Secretary Paul O'Neill, Secretary of the Treasury for George Bush, President of the United States. So, it seems that they're going back on their promise, aren't they? We were going to have a lockbox. They made a great show of voting on the lockbox during the Clinton administration. But now with the Bush administration, all things are changed. It really doesn't matter whether we spend the Social Security surplus, that money intended for the trust fund, for future retirees today, because the administration changed. Nothing else changed. We had all those votes to create the lockbox, but suddenly the lockbox isn't so important anymore. Not as important as tax cuts. And make no mistake, the tax cuts are the thing that are putting us in the hole. The federal government is borrowing the money to send out those rebate checks, which are against this year's estimated surplus, which doesn't exist, but it's calculated on your last year's income. Follow that? Okay. What it means is cash the check quickly. It might bounce soon. So this is the bizarre situation we find ourselves in. The Republican majority, after touting lockboxes and saving Social Security and Medicare for so long, in their rush to please their wealthy benefactors and pass a massive $2 trillion tax cut, particularly heavily oriented toward those who earn over $273,000 a year in estates over $5 billion, they have already frittered away the surplus, and things look even more bleak for the future